Biography of Dr. Tony Costa. So Tony Costa has an earned BA and MA in the study of religion and biblical studies and philosophy from the University of Toronto. Tony received his PhD in the area of theology and New Testament studies from Radboud University in the Netherlands. He is a member of the Society of Biblical Literature, the Evangelical Theological Society, and the Evangelical Philosophical Society. His area of expertise is biblical and systematic theology, cults, and New Age movement, and comparative world religions with a specialization in Islam. Tony is also an ordained minister of the gospel. As a Christian apologist, Dr. Costa gives reasons for the valid beliefs in Christianity and advocates the unique claims of Jesus Christ. He is also a lecturer at various universities and colleges on the existence of God as well as the credibility of the Christian faith. Tony is also a professor of apologetics with Toronto Baptist Seminary. He also serves as an adjunct professor with Heritage College and Seminary in Cambridge, Ontario, and Providence Theological Seminary in Colorado Springs, Colorado. He has lectured and ministered throughout Canada, the United States, and overseas. Tony is happily married to his wonderful wife and 3 children and resides in Toronto, Canada. Please help me in welcoming Dr. Tony Costa.
Thank you very much, Gary, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming here tonight for this very important event on can we trust the Torah, or can we trust today's Torah? So thank you again for giving up your Friday evening to be here with us tonight and share in this very important event. Let me just say something about the topic of the debate and the rules of the debate that have been mutually agreed upon by both parties. In terms of the outline of tonight's debate, each speaker is going to have introductory statements about, they're going to be 35 minutes in length each, and we'll begin first with Mr. Sadat Anwar, followed by Mr. Alex Kerimli, and then this will be followed by first rebuttals of 12 minutes each, and then second rebuttals of 5 minutes each, and then finally each speaker will have their concluding remarks of 12 minutes each. In terms of the format as well, after the introductory statements from each of the speakers, there's going to be a 10-minute break. And we also encourage you to check some of the tables that we have. We have a table at the back. I believe there's 2 tables that you can check out some information that is relevant to the topic tonight, or just information on both Christianity and Islam. So that's right at the back at the entrance to the church building. In terms of the debate format itself, we ask the audience please refrain from any forms of interruptions while the speakers are giving their lecture. Please withhold your applauses to the end. Hold your takbirs and your hallelujahs to the very end if you can. And if you don't, we will ask you to kindly leave the building. Moreover, we also ask that if you have any cell phones with you, please turn them off. There's nothing more annoying than cell phones going off. And so at this church, of course, we consider this a great sin. So if you could have your cell phones turned off. Some people have lost their lives as a result of that. No, I'm just kidding. I'd like to take this opportunity to also introduce each of the speakers. Since Mr. Sadat Anwar is going to be speaking first, I'd like to begin first by giving you his biography. Sadat was born and raised in Canada. Sadat is a Sunni Muslim. He's also a graduate of the University of Toronto with a master's degree in Middle Eastern Studies. Sadat has a keen interest in interfaith dialogue, especially between the 3 Abrahamic faiths. He's also a member of the Muslim Debate Initiative, MDI, an Islamic organization based in the United Kingdom. He's also active in Dawah, which is Muslim outreach, involved in activities in the Greater Toronto area. Mr. Alex Kerimli. Alex was born in Azerbaijan. Alex was born and raised, actually, he was an atheist and then became a Christian. He's an evangelical Christian, active in evangelism, and he is part of the Road to Christ Christian ministry. So, without any further ado, I'm going to ask Mr. Sadat Anwar to come and to give his first opening statements of 35 minutes, and then we will have Mr. Alex Kerimli. Can you please help me in welcoming Sadat Anwar?
In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful. First of all, I'd like to thank everyone here at Faith Baptist Church, especially Pastor Brian Robinson and Pastor Mr. Gary Thompson for hosting the debate, Mr. Tony Costa for moderating the debate, and of course Alex Kerimli for the invitation to do the debate. Can we trust today's Torah? Today's Torah. It depends partly on what we mean by trust. There's people that I trust partly, but not fully. There are people whose judgment I trust, but I don't trust their memory. Or I trust their memory, and I don't trust their judgment. Similarly, there are books that I trust for historical information, but not necessarily for morals or for theology. And conversely, there are parables and fairy tales and stories that we can trust for good moral lessons, but not necessarily for history. The question for the purpose of our discussion here is whether we can trust today's Torah 100% as the inerrant Word of God without any errors and without any contradictions. Can we trust the Torah in that way? Can we trust the Torah in the way that Alex and evangelical Christians trust it? My answer to that question is no. Muslims do trust and believe in the original Holy Torah, which was revealed to the Prophet Moses by God on Mount Sinai. But we cannot fully trust the present-day Torah, or the so-called 5 books of Moses found in the modern Bible. Today's Torah is not the same Torah as the one that was revealed to the Prophet Moses 3,500 years ago. Today's Torah still does contain the words of God and His prophets, but it also includes the words of third-party scribes, priests, and redactors who have sometimes falsely attributed statements to God and His prophets. Now, before I get into the reasons why, there's 2 misconceptions that I quickly want to clarify. Both of these misconceptions can be found in what Alex has presented in the past, and he's called the Muslim Global Torah Change Conspiracy. Misconception number 1 is that Alex has said in the past that all Muslims believe that the Torah was changed after the time of the Prophet Muhammad. Fact. There is no one official sanctioned Islamic view on when, where, or how, or by whom the Torah was changed. The idea that the Torah was changed after the time of Muhammad is one strand of thought amongst many strands of thought. In other words, Alex has in the past committed a strawman fallacy. There are even some Quranic verses and hadiths that would imply or indicate that the Torah may have been changed before the time of the Prophet Muhammad. That may come up in the rebuttals. Misconception number 2 is that by believing that the Torah has been changed, Muslims are engaging in a conspiracy theory. We are believing this conspiracy theory against all of the historical evidence, against the manuscript evidence, against the archaeological evidence. In short, Muslims are out in the cold in complete opposition to the historical proof by believing that the Torah has been changed. Fact. The majority of Western academic scholars of the Torah today, including even the majority of Jewish and Christian scholars, believe that the Torah as we have it today was originally composed more than half a millennium after the time of the Prophet Moses. What Islam teaches about the corruption of the Jewish and the Christian scriptures may have sounded like a conspiracy theory back in the 7th century, but in the 21st century, there's a remarkable convergence between what the Quran and the Islamic tradition are saying about the previous scriptures and what modern scholarship of the Torah is saying. The idea that most of the Torah was composed after the time of Moses can be found in the Quran in chapter 2, verse 79. فَوَيْلُ الَّذِينَ يَكْتُبُونَ الْكِتَابَ بِأَيْدِيهِمْ ثُمَّ يَقُولُونَ هَذَا مِنْ عِندِ اللَّهِ لِيَشْتَرُوا ثَمَنًا قَلِيلًا. The translation is that they write with their own hands. The preceding verses are talking about the Jews. Then it says they write with their own hands. Woe to those who write with their own hands and then say that this is from God, in order to gain from it some miserable gain. How are modern-day scholars of the Torah, including even most Christian scholars, agreeing with this Quranic verse or with this Quranic allegation? Well, today one of the main theories on the authorship of the Torah adopted by Christians is called the documentary hypothesis. In a nutshell, modern-day scholars say that the Torah had 4 different strands of writing, 4 different writers or groups of writers wrote the modern-day Torah. They identified these strands as the J source, which was written around 950 BCE, the E source, or the Elohist source, which was written 100 years after that, the D source, or the Deuteronomist source, which was written around 600 BCE, and finally the P, or the priestly source, which was written around 500 BCE. Take note of the dates, because if Moses lived between 1300 and 1500 BCE, and if the P source was composed, let's say, in 500 BCE, we're already close to 1,000 years after the time of Moses. The majority of biblical scholars today believe this. But is something true because the majority of people believe it? My answer is no. We should have our own good, independent reasons for believing or for not believing in something. So now let's get into the main reasons. I'm going to present 5 reasons for why I think we cannot trust today's Torah and we should reject the idea of Mosaic authorship of today's Torah. Number 1, there is no explicit claim of Mosaic authorship of all 5 books. Number 2, transmission problems. Number 3, canonization problems. Number 4, contradictions. And number 5, moral flaws. So let's explain number 1. No explicit claim of authorship. This should be evident to anyone who even does a cursory or a superficial reading of the Torah. You'll see that nowhere in the Torah is there any claim that Moses wrote all 5 books. You won't find any claim that Moses wrote Genesis or that Moses wrote Exodus, for example. To the contrary, there are strong indications that these books were written by someone other than Moses and after the time of Moses. What are some of those indications or clues? Well, one example is the consistent use of the third-person narrative perspective. In most of the stories in Genesis and Exodus, you find the use of the third person. So, for example, Adam said to God, God said to Adam, Eve said to God, Moses said unto God said unto Moses. If it was God speaking, we would expect him to say that I said unto Moses. Or if Moses wrote it, we would expect him to say that I went up the mountain, I saw the burning bush, and God said to me. But we don't find that. So the use of the third person perspective. And by third person, I don't mean any one of the 3 persons of the Trinity. Clearly, it's not God the Father speaking, it's not God the Son speaking, it's not God the Holy Ghost speaking. It's some other third person human scribe or chronicler who's writing this. Just like if I said, John said to Tony. If I write, John said to Tony, you know that I'm not John and you know that I'm not Tony. The next clue is anachronisms. Anachronisms means details that do not fit in with the supposed time of writing. For example, right at the beginning of Deuteronomy 1:1, these are the words that Moses spoke to all of Israel beyond the Jordan. Now, if you remember, Moses never crossed the Jordan. So this is somebody who's already situated in the promised land, somebody who's already sitting in the land of Canaan saying, these are the words that Moses spoke back when he was on the other side of the Jordan. Just like, for example, if I say that beyond Niagara Falls is America, or across Niagara Falls is America, that only makes sense if we are situated here in Canada. That's the Canadian perspective. Another example is Genesis 12:6. At that time, the Canaanites were in the land. At that time means at Abraham's time. During Abraham's time, the Canaanites were in the land. But if Moses is writing Genesis, during Moses' time, the Canaanites were still in the land too. So there's no need for emphasis that at that time, the Canaanites were still in the land. Also, Deuteronomy chapter 34, verse 10. Not since has there arisen another prophet in Israel like Moses. That's not saying much if Moses is writing it. It only makes sense if a long time after the time of Moses, someone is saying that not since the time of Moses has there arisen another prophet as great as him. So these are some strong indications that make it pretty clear to me that the present day Torah is not the writing of Moses. The lack of an explicit claim of Mosaic authorship coupled with the constant use of the third person perspective and the many anachronisms is probably what led the following person to say, "It is clearer than the sun at noon that the Pentateuch, the Torah, was not written by Moses but by someone who lived long after Moses." Which Muslim said that? Baruch Spinoza, the 17th century Jewish philosopher. And now, true, he wasn't a religious Jew, but the point is he wasn't a Muslim, and he's coming from the Judeo-Christian scholarly tradition. Let's move on to problem number 2, transmission problems. There is a major problem pertaining to the transmission of the Torah. In other words, what is the history of this book and how did it get to us? Alex is probably, I think, going to bank much of his presentation on refuting the idea that the Torah was changed after the time of the Prophet Muhammad. But let's go farther back than where he might want us to look. Let's look at the big picture. Let's look at the trees. Let's not miss the trees for the forest or the forest for the trees. So what do we mean by transmission problems? Well, first of all, there's a 1,000-year missing link in the manuscripts. Alex likes talking about the Dead Sea Scrolls, but the Dead Sea Scrolls date from around 250 BCE. They were discovered in the Quran caves in the late 1940s. It's one of the great ironies that God intended for 2 shepherds named Muhammad and Musa to begin these discoveries of the Dead Sea Scrolls. So Muhammad and Moses discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls. And amongst these discoveries, they discovered fragments of all 5 books of the Pentateuch, very good. But the manuscripts that they found, as I said, date at the earliest from 250 BCE. If we consider that Moses lived around 1400 or 1300 BCE, then we have a gap in the manuscript tradition of over 1,000 years. In other words, we don't have manuscripts for the first 1,000 years of the existence of the Torah. So, you can do the math here. For example, if Moses lived around 1300 BCE and the Dead Sea Scrolls are from 250 BCE, and even those are partial fragments, not the complete Pentateuch, you do the subtraction and you're left with over 1,000 years. So, I mean, if I was an evangelical Christian or if I was Alex, honestly, I wouldn't want to bring up the issue of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Like, I really wouldn't want to bring up the issue of manuscripts. But we're not done discussing the transmission problems yet. The next problem is proven transmission breaks. Proven transmission breaks. It sounds like I'm talking about a car, but I'm talking about the Torah here. Transmission break number 1 happened sometime between the time of Moses himself and King Josiah, who lived around 600 BCE. Now, where did this conspiracy theory come from, that there's a break in the transmission? It comes from the Bible itself. In 2 Kings chapter 22, verse 8, it says, "And Hilkiah the high priest said unto Shaphan the scribe, I have found the book of the Torah." In Hebrew it reads Torah, "in the house of the Lord. And it came to pass when the king had heard the words of the book of the Torah that he rent his clothes." He tore his clothes. Why did he do that? He didn't like his shirt? Why is he so worked up and tearing his clothes when he hears the book of the Torah? Obviously, it's because he had not seen this book of the Torah in a very, very long time. In fact, it tells you that pretty much in the next chapter. In 2 Kings chapter 23, verse 24, it says, Josiah put away the household gods and idols, all the abominations that were seen in the land of Judah and in Jerusalem, that he might perform the words of the Torah, which were written in the book that Hilkiah the priest found in the house of the Lord. He also did other reforms. He did away with unauthorized places of worship, altars for child sacrifice, and so forth. But my point is this: isn't Josiah and isn't Hilkiah supposed to know this already? Is this not supposed to be in the Torah that they already have, that you don't worship false gods, you don't worship idols, you don't worship statues, you don't put idols of false gods in the temple? If the king and the high priest had ever read or heard of the book of Deuteronomy in their lives, they would have known this already, because in Deuteronomy chapter 12 verse 2 it says, "You shall utterly destroy all the places wherein the nations which you shall possess serve their gods, upon the high mountains and upon the hills and upon every green tree. And you shall overthrow their altars and break their pillars and burn their groves with fire. And you shall hew down the graven images of their gods and destroy the names of them out of that place." Isn't that Judaism 101? Isn't that like the Torah 101 or the Torah for dummies? You don't worship false gods. Why do they have to rediscover this lost book of the Torah to know that? Clearly, they have not seen the Torah in a very long time. Transmission break number 2 happened sometime between the time of King Josiah, whom we just mentioned, and the scribe Ezra, who came around 200 years later. Now, which Muslim is telling us this? Which atheist scholar is telling us this? The Bible is telling us this in the book of Nehemiah in chapter 8, verses 1 to 18. I'm going to start with verse 14 if you haven't. "And they found written in the Torah, which the Lord had commanded by Moses, that the children of Israel should dwell in booths." Remember that. Children of Israel should dwell in booths in the feast of the 7th month. That's the Festival of Tabernacles, or the Festival of Booths. And all the congregation of them that will come again out of the captivity made booths and sat under the booths. For since the days of Joshua the son of Nun, the children of Israel had not done so. But don't you think a Jewish priest and a scribe like Ezra should have known about this already? Whatever he had been a scribe of before it, obviously did not include important parts of the Torah, because the commandment to live in booths during the Festival of Tabernacles is found in the book of Leviticus. It's found in the Torah that, according to Alex, was never lost, never corrupted, never changed, never forgotten. But if Ezra and the high priest had ever read the book of Leviticus in their lives, they would have read Leviticus chapter 23, verse 42, where it says very clearly, "You shall dwell in booths 7 days. All that are Israelites born shall dwell in booths." It's talking about that same festival. Clearly, they had not seen the book of Leviticus in a very, very long time. Let's move on to the third main problem, which is canonization problems. Basically, this means different versions of the Torah. 3,500 years after the revelation of the Torah, the canonization of the Torah is still not really fully complete. There is still dispute over it. Today's Torah can mean at least 5 to 6 different Torahs. It can mean the Septuagint Torah, which is today's Torah for millions of Greek Orthodox and Eastern Orthodox speaking Christians. It can mean the Masoretic Torah, which is today's Torah for millions of English speaking Protestant Christians. It can mean the Samaritan Torah, which is today's Torah for the tiny remnant of the northern Israelite tribes still worshipping at Mount Gerizim in northern Israel. It can mean the Peshitta Torah, which is today's Torah for the Syriac Christians. And it can mean even the Latin Vulgate Torah, which for centuries was today's Torah for most of your ancestors in Western Europe. That was the Torah that they read. Now, Alex might show you some passages from the Masoretic and the Septuagint text to show that there's not any differences or any real differences between the two. But I want to show you a few versions, a few verses which show the opposite. So, for example, if we read Genesis 5:31, but which Genesis 5:31 are we going to read from? Which Torah? If you read from the Septuagint, it says, all the days of Lamech were 753, and he died. But in the Masoretic, it says, all the days of Lamech were 777, and he died. And the Samaritan Torah says, all the days of Lamech were 653, and he died. You might want to check your Bibles afterwards to see which version it is that yours says. Now, clearly, this is not a problem of different translations, is it? This is a problem of different versions. Genesis 16:12, he, meaning Ishmael, he, Ishmael, shall be a wild man. Every evangelical Christian who ministers to Muslims knows this verse. In the Masoretic, it also says he shall be a wild man. It uses the Hebrew word peri. But in the Samaritan, it says he will be a fruitful man. The Hebrew word used is actually different, para. Similarly, there's Exodus 12:40, where it says the length of time the Israelite people lived in Egypt and Canaan was 430 years. But in the Masoretic, it says the length of time the Israelite people lived in Egypt, meaning Egypt only, was 430 years. And Samaritan, I believe, agrees with the Septuagint. Now, for those who say this doesn't make any difference, it makes a difference. If Tony told me I have 10 minutes to do the rebuttals, versus Tony telling me I have 10 minutes to do the rebuttals and the conclusion, that makes a big difference to me. So these are some of the problematic issues that have to do with different versions, not translations, different versions of the Torah, that led the scholar Howard Cox to say, when asked what a passage of the Bible says, in many cases the honest answer is that one tradition says one thing, and another tradition says something else. In addition to these 5-6 different versions of the Torah, I have found another version of the Torah, which I'm going to call the Alexan Torah, because I've named it after Alex. And we don't have any manuscript proof for it, but we can sort of reconstruct it from the references or the citations that Alex gives in his book. So, for example, on page 253 of his book, he says, there is no command anywhere in the Bible to kill those who do not want to believe. There is no command anywhere in the Bible to kill those who do not want to believe. Rather, there is the commandment to leave them alone. So what I gather from this is that Alex's Torah is quite different from the versions of the Torah that I have read. So for example, in the Masoretic and in the Septuagint, in Exodus chapter 31 verse 15 it says, anyone who does work on the Sabbath is to be put to death. But the Alexan Torah, I think, says anyone who does work on the Sabbath is to be left alone. Deuteronomy chapter 13, verses 6 to 10. If your brother, the son of your mother, or your son entices you secretly, saying, let us go and serve other gods, you shall surely kill him. That's what it says in the Torahs that we probably read. But in the election Torah, it says, if your brother, the son of your mother, or your son entices you secretly, saying, let us go and serve other gods, you shall surely leave him alone. It's a different Torah, and not a trustworthy one either, I don't think. Let's move on to number 4, contradictions. Even if we determine which Torah is correct, which one of these versions is correct, what do we do with the problems of contradictions within the text? In the Quran, God says, do they not consider the Quran with care? Had it been from anyone other than God, they would have found therein much discrepancy, many contradictions. This is a polite hint in the Quran of how God wants us to approach not only the present-day Torah, but any book which is claiming to be from God. Now, to be honest, as soon as you get into the Torah, you basically get past 2 or 3 pages of Genesis and you run smack into contradictions. So, for example, right in Genesis 1, were the humans created first or were the animals created first? According to Genesis 1:26, the animals are created first. According to Genesis 2:7, Adam, human beings, are created first. This is why the documentary hypothesis says there's different strands of the Torah, different versions of the Torah. Example number 2, will Jacob be called Jacob anymore? In Genesis 32:28, God says to Jacob, your name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel. But then later on in Genesis 46:2, God himself calls Jacob, saying, Jacob, Jacob. Example 3, was the name Yahweh known before the time of Moses? The answer, according to Exodus 6:2, is no. Because God says, I appeared unto Abraham and Isaac and unto Jacob by the name of God Almighty, but by name Yahweh was I not known to them. But in Genesis 4:1, that's earlier on, Eve uses the name Yahweh and says, I have conceived a man, or I have gotten a man from Yahweh. Which passage of the Torah is trustworthy here? Example number 4 is, how old was Ishmael when he left Abraham? Everyone agrees that by the time of Genesis 21, Ishmael has to have been a teenager. Minimum 13, 14, 15 years old. But in verse 14 of Genesis 21, it says, Abraham gave some items to Hagar, putting it on her shoulder along with the child. The Septuagint is even more clear. The Septuagint version says, he put the child on her shoulder. How do you put a 13, 14, 15-year-old kid on her shoulder? In verse 15, when the water in the skin was gone, she cast the child under one of the bushes. Like the picture that's painted is very much of a very small Ishmael who can't fend for himself at all. Verse 17, God speaks to Hagar, not to Ishmael, even though Ishmael's the one that was crying. Verse 18, God tells Hagar, arise, lift up the lad and hold him in your hand. It's not an appropriate thing to say to a woman who's thirsty in the desert, pick up your 14-year-old kid in your hand. Example number 5, Joseph's dream from God, was it fulfilled or was it unfulfilled? In Genesis 37:9, it says that Joseph had a dream, and he told it to his brothers. Listen, he said, I've had a dream, and this time the sun and the moon and the 11 stars were bowing down to me. Obviously, the 11 stars are Joseph's 11 brothers, and the sun and the moon must be who? It must be his parents, Jacob and his mother, Rachel. The problem is that earlier on in Genesis 35:19, it says Rachel died. So the prophecy is not fulfilled. The sun and the moon never submitted to him because the moon, being his mother Rachel, had already died. In the Quran, on the other hand, in the Quran in chapter Yusuf or chapter Joseph, it says in verse 4, Yusuf said to his father, oh my father, I have seen 11 stars in the sun and the moon prostrating to me. It sounds like a copy of the Torah, right? But the ending is different because in verse 100, it says, and he raised his parents upon the throne, and they bowed to him in prostration. And he said, oh my father, this is the explanation of my vision of before. My Lord has made it a reality. And incidentally, in the same chapter at the very end, it says, there was certainly in their stories a lesson for those of understanding. Never was the Quran a narration invented, but rather it is a confirmation of what was before it, and a detailed explanation of all things, and a guidance and a mercy for a people who believe. Example number 6, the universal flood. Was there a universal flood that destroyed all life? According to Genesis 17, there was. A flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh, it says, wherein is the breath of life from under heaven, and everything that is in the earth shall die. Everything on the earth, under the heaven, is going to perish, is going to be destroyed in the flood. Genesis 7:4 says the same thing. Every living substance that I have made, Will I destroy it all from the face of the earth? And in Genesis 8:9, it confirms the waters were on the face of the whole earth. Not part of the earth, not the Near East, not Mesopotamia, the whole earth. The problem with that is that we have archaeological evidence of ancient civilizations that were not just in existence, but flourishing during the time that Noah's flood is supposed to have occurred. For example, the Old Kingdom in ancient Egypt. That's actually called the Age of the Pyramids because the construction was going on. And there is Harappa, which I wanted to mention, and this is in modern-day Pakistan. And similarly, this civilization was flourishing at the very time that Noah's flood is supposed to have occurred. So much so that it's called the mature Harappan phase. So basically, the idea of a universal flood in the 25th century BCE or thereabouts does not hold water, pun intended. The Quran mentions Noah's flood, but it does not so explicitly spell out that it was a universal flood, so it could have been a regional flood. Nor does the Quran mention the part about God putting a rainbow in the sky to remind himself that he's not going to send another flood again, and so forth. Example number 7. Ancient Egypt uses its entire labor workforce. According to Exodus 12, the number of Israelites who came out of Egypt was 600,000. If 600,000 men. If 600,000 men came out of Egypt during the Exodus, that would mean at least about 2 million people in total, because they have wives, they have children, and we're not counting the cattle and all that. But the problem with that is, again, that there's absolutely no evidence. Like Egypt, there's no ancient Egyptian records that would mention that 2 million of our people just disappeared, they just left. What happened to the economy of ancient Egypt? Why don't we find any settlements out in the desert where these 2 million people encamped? How would Moses even wake up 2 million people in the middle of the night and mobilize them towards the Red Sea without anybody taking note? In the Quran, in chapter 26, verses 52 to 54, the Pharaoh, very interestingly, the Pharaoh actually dismisses the Israelites and says they're a small band of troublemakers. They're just a small group of mischief makers. And this is very much in line with what modern-day scholarship is saying, which is that if there was an Exodus, it couldn't have happened on the mass proportions as it's reported in the book of Exodus. Number 5 is moral flaws. What I identify to be as moral flaws. You might have a different moral compass than me. It's a subjective thing. That's fine. If I have time, I want to discuss some of these, which is that there's Eve's double punishment. For example, in Genesis chapter 3, verse 16, to the woman, to Eve, God says, I will greatly increase your pangs in childbearing. In pain you shall bring forth children, yet your desire shall be for your husband, and he shall rule over you. Has he proven himself worthy of ruling over her? If he just went along with her suggestion, would be a question. But it doesn't seem fair to me. It seems like a double punishment. Every woman here will suffer from the pains of childbirth when she has children, whereas men will not suffer that. Men will not suffer that. And you see a similar thing going on with Miriam's punishment in Numbers chapter 12. Miriam and Aaron, both of them, Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Ethiopian woman whom he had married. But then in verse 10 it says, the cloud departed from off the tabernacle, and behold, Miriam became leprous. She had leprosy, or a skin disease, as a punishment. And Aaron looked upon Miriam, and behold, she was leprous. Again, the point is, Miriam and Aaron spoke out against Moses, criticized Moses. God only punishes Miriam. He doesn't punish Aaron. This strikes me as being a moral flaw. What about marrying a rapist in Deuteronomy chapter 22, verse 29? If a man finds a girl that is a virgin who is not married, and lays hold on to her and lies with her, and they be found, then the man that lay with her shall give unto the girl's father 50 shekels of silver, and she shall be his wife, because he has humbled her. He may not put her away, meaning he may not divorce her for the rest of the days of his life. I'm not suggesting that there's an evil intent behind this law. The intent here is probably a deterrent, so that men will not rape women, otherwise they may sort of get stuck with her. There's probably a good intention behind the law. But is it a perfect law? Is it a holy law that you would expect to come from God? I don't believe it is. And it mentions nothing about the consent of the woman. What if she doesn't want to marry a rapist? And this would solve a lot of problems for a lot of love-stricken kids in high school. The guy's in love with the girl, rape her, you get to marry her. This strikes me as being a moral flaw. What about ritual uncleanliness after female childbirth in Leviticus 12? To summarize, after the birth of a baby boy, the woman is ritually impure for a total of 40 days. But after the birth of a baby girl, the woman is ritually impure for a total of 80 days. So she's ritually impure for double the amount. Why? Another aspect of what I consider to be moral flaws is the moral depravity of the prophets of God. Just like we Muslims have a problem with Jesus being elevated to the level of God, we have a problem with David, Lot, Noah, Moses being reduced down to the level of sinners. And not even sinners like us, much worse, doing much worse things. So for example, Noah gets naked, he gets drunk, and he gets naked, and he's lying around naked. Many Westerners will say, no big deal, I've done that or something. But for Muslims, this is unthinkable that a prophet of God does that. Moreover, what about the prophet Lot, who doesn't just get naked, but he commits incest with his own daughters? Is that befitting, or is that what you would expect from a prophet of God? And would anyone want to read those passages here to their daughters? If I had a daughter in the audience, honestly, I wouldn't want to bring up that passage at all. What about Moses commanding the targeted killing of innocent non-combatant women and children in the book of Numbers? In the book of Numbers, chapter 31, verse 17, Moses commands the Israelites, "Now therefore kill every male among the little ones," all the little boys kill them, "and kill every woman that has known man by lying with him. But all the girls or all the women children that have not known man by lying with him, keep alive for yourselves." So all the babies are to be killed, and all the women who are not virgins are to be killed. And that presumably would include pregnant women as well. The pregnant women and young-born children are also to be killed. I don't believe that any prophet of God ever killed civilian women and children like this. So in summary, these are some very good reasons, I believe, and these reasons are not limited to Islam or to the Quran or to a Muslim perspective. These are good reasons to doubt the Mosaic authorship of today's Torah, and therefore to doubt its continuing divine status. I hope that Alex will address at least some of these points in his presentation, and not just give us a rehash of that straw man argument, the global Torah change conspiracy, which doesn't take into account the possibility of the Torah having been changed before the time of the Prophet Muhammad. He only addresses the possibility of the Torah having been changed after the time of Prophet Muhammad. Clearly, there are a host of larger problems that exist in the transmission and the canonization of the Torah centuries before the time of Muhammad, and even centuries before the time of Jesus. I hope Alex will respond to these problems and give us clear and convincing proofs for why we should trust and believe in the present-day Torah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sadat. And at this point, I'd like to invite Alex Kerimli to come and give us 35 minutes. Alex also asked me to inform me that English is not his first language, so if his English seems a little broken, that's because it is. Help me in welcoming Alex Kerimli tonight.
So, the Torah is 5 books of Moses: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Tanakh is Old Testament, including 5 books of Moses at the first part of it. So I have to make a first statement. Statement is like, I do accept the claim of modern Muslims about that the Quran we have right now, as I have it right here, is the same one what Muhammad, peace be upon him, used to recite, made by 3 logical, for me, evidence. First of all the Qurans we have in Arabic today are similar or the same. All ancient manuscripts of the Quran today as well, they are the same. And what most important is that we don't have any other version of the Quran as old as like Topkapi manuscript or Samarkand manuscript. It's very different from the Quran we have right now. Well, after saying that, I have to make a disclaimer. I do well aware of the fact we have 2 different Qurans in Arabic right now, which are the Hafs and Warsh manuscript. They are existing right now today. We have 1,354 differences among them. There also We have textual problems between the top copy in Samarkand Museum and Simon copies of the Quran, and they are not 100% agree with each other, as well as they're not 100% agree with the Qurans we have right now in Arabic. But I see the differences are minor. They're not really, threaten any of the story narration from the Qurans we have right now, and they're not really going against any of the Quranic topic. So therefore, I consider these differences are minor, and I think the Qurans we have right now and the Quran that Prophet Muhammad used to recite they are extremely similar, and therefore, as I said, I accept the claim of one of the Muslims that the Quran, what we have right now in Arabic, it's virtually the same with the Quran that Muhammad he used to recite. Okay, now we can start the presentation. Can we trust this Torah? And I believe that's the most important question we could address as we debate between Muslims and Christians. Because if you start reading the book you start reading any book from the beginning to the end. So therefore, we're not going to start reading the book of the Bible from Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. We start reading the book from Genesis. So therefore, the Torah, is usually found in the Hebrew language, in the script, in a scroll. Like Torah for all known history is written in Hebrew by hand. But of course, we have many versions of the Torah. Sorry, not the versions, but the books, and there's a book format. Like this one I do have. It's a Tanakh, it's entire Old Testament. So the Torah, it means basically in law, direction, and instruction. And it's found in 213 verses of the Old Testament. So now, how can I read and understand the Torah as a Christian? I have three choices. First of all, I have my personal opinion. So I can read the Torah stories, and I could look through the lens of 21st century person and say, well, this story doesn't make sense, or I agree with that story, etc. from the Torah, right? So, second, I could use the opinion of other people. Let's say I can go to the liberal or political scholars of the past centuries, like Wellhausen, for example. Or I can go to the modern liberal scholar like Bart Ehrman, or even I can go extreme and to hear what Richard Dawkins, the atheist, will speak. For sure, he will have something good to speak about the existence of God, any God, Allah or Yahweh. But I can also use the New Testament as my reference point. Now, if I claim myself to be Christian, it means that the highest authority will be on the New Testament, and everything will be irrelevant. So therefore, let us read from the New Testament, and I have a first claim to make. The New Testament confirms the divine origin of the Torah in the 1st century AD. So let's start. The law and the prophets found 6 times in the New Testament. The scripture 31 times, as it is written 34 times, fulfilled 57 times, the law 137 times. And every time we find it, it's always speaking in a positive sense, it's confirming the Torah as a scroll during the time of Christ. So here I show you only 3 verses. Jesus speaking, "For verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law, till all be fulfilled." Then we hear Peter speaking. "And now, brethren, I know that in ignorance you did crucify Jesus, as did also your rulers. But the things which God foreshowed by the mouth of all prophets, that his Christ should suffer, he does fulfill." And now we have Paul speaking. "All scripture is given by inspiration of God and is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness." Again, it's speaking about all scripture, all the Torah. So we have Paul, Peter, and Jesus speaking and endorsing the Torah in the days as we're working on the earth. So conclusion is the New Testament confirms the divine origin of the Torah in the 1st century AD. Now what about Muslims? How they will look at it? Well, any Muslim will have also 3 options. The first, personal opinion. So you can read Torah's story of Genesis and think, well, it doesn't make sense, it makes sense to me. Then you can use opinion of others and see like what, again, liberal scholars want to say about the Torah. Or you can go as far as listen to the Muslim debaters and presenters, Ahmed Didat, Zakir Naik, Yusuf Esther. And also you can go to the Quran, the Hadith, and Sirah Rasulullah. Now, if a person claims to be a Muslim, I expect from him to believe that the high authority for the Muslim, it should be the Quran, the Hadith, and Sirah Rasulullah, and everything else, it goes, like, became irrelevant. So now I have to make my second claim that the Quran and Muhammad, peace be upon him, confirmed the divine origin of the Torah in 7th century AD, or 3rd century of Hijrah. Okay, this Quranic verse. O people of the Scripture, Jews and Christians, now has come to you, our messenger Muhammad, explaining to you much of that which you used to hide from the Scripture and pass over much, leaving out without explanation. That's very interesting. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying in this specific verse of the Quran, and he's addressing to the Jews and said, look, O people of Scripture, Jews, in that particular subject, now has come to you, not to your ancestors, 1,000 years before, 2,000 years before, but our messenger Muhammad, peace be upon him, explaining to you much, so it's meaning a lot, of which you used to hide from Scripture and pass over much, leaving without explanation. Meaning, definition is, if Jews were already changing the Torah for centuries, why they should hide anything from the Torah? They will actually bring it and present to the people. Say, look, it's our immoral behaviors are supported by our new revision of the Torah. Okay? But in that case, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, well, you hide from Scripture because you cannot change it. And here's a perfect example from Sahih Bukhari, the Hadith. A Jew and the Jews were brought to Allah's apostle in charge of committing an illegal sexual intercourse. The Prophet asked them, what is the legal punishment for this sin in your book, Torah? They replied, our priests have innovated the punishment of blackening their faces with charcoal at Tajbiyah. Abdullah bin Salam said, Allah's apostle, tell them to bring the Torah. The Torah was brought, and then one of the Jews put his hand over the divine verse of Rajam, stoning to death, and started reading what preceded and what followed it. On that, Ibn Salam said to the Jew, lift up your hand. Behold, the divine verse of Rajam was under his hand. So it's exactly what the Quran said. You hide from the Scripture. This verse caused 2 people to die that day. And the Jews were so uncomfortable to have this verse against them, why they didn't simply change it? It's logical. You change it and then you have no problem. Nobody can accuse you of anything. Right? But it was not changed. It was hidden. And the previous verse from Quran said, you hide much, you hide a lot, meaning a lot of stuff is going against you, and you have no choice. You cannot change it by definition, so what you do, you hide a lot. Okay. Let's go to Sirah Rasulullah, which is biography of Muhammad. In chapter 9, the Qibla, it said, once Mu'adh asked some Jewish rabbis about the subject mentioned in the Torah, but they refused to answer him about it. So Allah revealed the verse, those who conceal what we have sent down after we have made it plain will be cursed by Allah. You see the word conceal? It's not, he didn't say, well, those who changed the word, those who corrupted it. No, he said you conceal, you hide it. And how did you hide? How did they hide it? Simply by refusing to talk about the subject. Let's go next one. On another occasion, the apostle entered the Jewish school and invited those who were present to Allah. They asked, what is your religion, Muhammad? And he replied, the religion of Abraham. They said, Abraham was a Jew. But the apostle told them, bring the Torah and let that judge between me and you. But they what? Refused. So again, Muhammad, peace be upon him, had no problem to say, well, let Torah judge between me and you. Why the Jews, if they were accustomed to change Torah so many times for centuries, why won't they say, hey, Muhammad, you know what, come tomorrow, and we're going to find it. It's a problem to write Abraham was a Jew anywhere in the Torah and then read it in front of Muhammad. No problem. But they refuse to do it because they know they have no power or authority or even desire to change the Torah, because that's capital sin. I'll go to the Quran. The likeness of those who were charged with the Torah when they did not observe it is as the likeness of an ass bearing books. Well, the question is, what's the problem? Who is the problem here in this implication? The books, corrupted, or the animal who has no profit because of bearing books, and there's nothing good coming from the animal. You have to know what's there, and you have to observe it. Not only have it, not only read it, but observe it. Here's another Quranic verse. All food was lawful to the children of Israel except that which Israel had forbidden to himself before the Torah was revealed. Say, bring present tense the Torah and read it present tense if you are truthful. So here, the last one that I said to Muhammad, peace be upon him, look, if Jews come to me and said, you know what, we're not supposed to eat camel's meat, or we're not supposed to drink camel's milk. Don't believe them until they bring the Torah and read it. If it's written there, then they are truthful. Otherwise, they're liars. And if thou, Muhammad, are in doubt concerning that which we reveal unto thee, then question those who do what? Who read, again, present tense, the scripture that was before thee. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in His knowledge and foreknowledge and all knowledge, He said, you know what, Muhammad, go, if you don't sure if I send you, so go across the street to that synagogue with the Jewish people sitting and reading the Torah, and they will tell you the truth because they have my Torah unchanged. Say, O Muhammad, people of the scripture, Jews and Christians, you have nothing as regard guidance till you act according to the Torah and Injil, and what has now have been sent down to you from your Lord, the Quran. Well, that's interesting. So, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said to the Jews and Christians that they have nothing as regard the guidance till you not only have, not only read, but to act or observe. And act according to the Torah, number 1, Injil Gospel, number 2, and the Quran, number 3. You see that? One shelf and authority. All 3 books are on the one shelf of authority. If you try to bring the Torah down, you will bring the Quran down with it. But what about this verse? Very famous. Then woe to those who write the book, the Torah, with their own hands, and then say, this is from Allah, traffic with it for miserable price. First of all, I said, well, if the Muslims said, well, it's about changing the Torah, I said, well, first of all, it's about writing the book, not changing. The word write is not the word change. But we have to read verses about it. And there among them, among whom? Of course, like the Quran as in the Bible, speaking about 2 groups of people, the true believers and non-believers. So here, is said, and there among them illiterate. So among the Jewish believers, there are a group of people who are illiterate, or I should say ignorant, who know not the book, the Torah, but see their own desires, and they do nothing by conjecture. And let's read both verses together. And there are among them illiterates who don't know the book, then woe to those who write the book. So the same group of people who don't know the book, or write another book, or corrupt existing book. Well, I have to tell you, if you don't know the book, if I don't know the Hebrew, how can I corrupt the Hebrew? So for a person to corrupt, to have ability to corrupt the text, you have to know the text thoroughly. But here for sure, these people who are illiterate or ignorant, they don't know the Torah, they write a book. And the problem another book. Well, let's go 10 verses down and see. And there comes to them, Jews, a book from Allah, the Quran, the confirming what is with them. When? Confirming what is with them during the days of Muhammad, peace be upon him. Let's go up several verses and we hear again. O children of Israel, believe in that what I have sent down, this Quran, confirming that which is with you, the Torah and Injil, Gospel. Well, let's read them all together. Let's put them on the screen. So my question is, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, you know what, I sent the Quran down to confirm which book? The book of 78 or the book of 79 verse? Well, I believe that's the book of 78. Okay, therefore, whatever it is with the Jews, it's book, which is verse 78, the Torah. It means, at least, the true Torah was existed at the time when it was another book came along, and it's not really from God. Okay, so the Torah must be reliable in the days of Muhammad, peace be upon him. Then another one. Or you have been given the scripture, Jews and Christians, believe in what we have revealed to Muhammad, peace be upon him, confirming what is already with you. And here's another one. But how do they, Jews, come to you, Muhammad, for decision? Well, they have, present tense, the Torah, in which is, present tense, the plain decision of Allah. Yet even after that, they turn away, for they are not really believers. So again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala complained to Muhammad, peace be upon him, and said, look, how come those Jews keep coming to you again and again and bother you? Well, they have a Torah, in which is plain decision of God. Why they come to you to confirm it? Let's go to Sunnah Abu Dawud. There's another hadith. A group of Jews came and invited the Apostle of Allah to Kuf. So he visited them at their school. They said, Abu Qasim, one of our men has committed fornication with a woman, so pronounce judgment upon them. They placed the cushion for Apostle of Allah, who sat on it and said, bring the Torah. It was then brought. He then withdrew the cushion from beneath him and placed the Torah on it, saying, I believe in thee and in him who revealed thee. Now we're talking about the scroll, complete scroll Torah from Genesis to Deuteronomy. He didn't say, well, I believe in parts of it, I believe in some part, I didn't believe in some. He said, you know what he did actually? Well, first of all, some of the Muslims said, well, you know what, we don't believe he said it. Probably this Islamic source was corrupted by bad Muslims. Well, I said, okay, maybe he never said that, I believe in thee and in him who revealed thee, pointing to the Torah scroll. But what he did, he was sitting on a cushion, and then the Torah was brought. He even withdrew the cushion from beneath him and placed the Torah on it, and let's say, and he said something else. But it's fine. Whatever he did is actually, he brought the Torah scroll higher than he was sitting. So he regards it as a true, trustworthy Word of God. Therefore, conclusion is the Quran and Muhammad, peace be upon him, confirmed the divine origin of the Torah in 7th century AD. Okay? But you might say, well, I don't believe that. Because first of all, I don't believe in the New Testament, and I don't believe your explanation of the Quran and the Hadith. That's fine. Then I have another one for you, which is, yes, that's the scrolls. Archaeological discoveries of the last century confirmed that the Torah has never been changed during the last 2,139 years. And here's that's the scrolls, I think, found of millennium. And I have in my hands here this booklet that I purchased in the Royal Italian Museum in 2009. Okay? I want to show you page 18 what's written. So it speaks about this Genesis, and it said its date 125 to 100 before Christ. And it's 20 copies of Genesis being discovered. And let me read a few important information from there. Dating from around 250 before Common Era to 68 Common Era. The scrolls include some 207 biblical manuscripts representing nearly all the books of the Hebrew Bible, Christian Old Testament, except the book of Esther. Some of the biblical Dead Sea Scrolls are almost 1,000 years older than the next oldest known copies of the Hebrew Bible. And that's the most important part is here. The copies of Genesis among the Dead Scrolls are extremely similar to traditional Hebrew text. What does it mean? Let's have a chart here. So we have a Torah in every synagogue here as a scroll, and here as a book in front and on side of me. And Dead Sea Scrolls apart more than 2,000 years. And everything what we have in between, all the copies archaeologically discovered and kept in a museum or in private possessions, they are almost identical. I should say they're extremely similar, and they are virtually the same. And then the New Testament came later, and then Quran came much later. And yet both books confirm that the Torah was divine in their time. And of course, we have different manuscripts, as Sadat showed us before. So we have at least Septuagint, found in 2nd century BC partially, and 4th century AD complete version. And of course we have in the 5th century Syriac Peshitta on the bottom and Latin Vulgate on the top. So, and they are all similar. The stories are the same, nothing changed. So I have to make a statement now. Then I believe the Torah has never been changed for over 2,000 years because 3 facts. All the Torahs in Hebrew, in all the synagogues on the planet, in all books, are the same. Second, all the old manuscripts of the Torah are extremely similar, or I should say virtually the same. And yet, the most important, I don't have any other book, ancient scroll of the Torah, which is completely different from the manuscript we have. So, well, you might say, well, you know what, I don't believe that, and so that gives a lot of explanations why he will not believe the Torah. Then I have to bring, of course, the global Torah change conspiracy. But this conspiracy is basically the Muslims blame Jews and Christians to have this conspiracy, not the other way around. So the question is, when was it changed, the Torah? Before Jesus, between Jesus and Muhammad, or after Muhammad, peace be upon him? So, let me see. And that implies that we have annual Torah change contests going on for centuries, and the Jews will say, well, let's come together once in a while and write a new Torah, or some additional, something we have to change it. And eventually have a good sign, like change Torah with us, let's do it. Well, maybe. Then this will be interesting to read. For example, well, the Jews come to Jewish people come and start talking. Shalom. Hi, Manishma, how are you doing? Do you have something to do next year? Oh, Shalom Yehuda, no, nothing at all. Why don't you rewrite the Torah with my corruption in it? Oh, Baruch Hashem, let God be praised. What's a great idea. May I start today? Sure. But let me adulterate a few more stories about Moses. You'll have them after lunch. Shalom. But then I have a second question, the part of the first one. When do you think the Torah stopped being changed? This is the most important one. And then, what was changed? So let's address the first topic. When was it changed? So I have to admit, I found the website, the Muslim website, and the article by Bassam Zawadi, who brought 37 points and proved, so to speak, from Islamic sources that Torah was changed. Well, I have to bring one with you because I'm running out of time, unfortunately. And here is a companion of Muhammad, peace be upon him, Ibn Abbas. He said, the kings after the time of Jesus, son of Mary, substituted the Torah and Gospel, and they are used to be amongst them believers who are reading the Torah, etc. I have to skip it. So the king summoned them and gathered them together. He proposed either death to them, or that they leave the recitation of the Torah and the Gospel, except what they substituted in place of it. Okay? So let's see what Bassam Zawadi wants to say about it. So here we see that Ibn Abbas talks about how the kings of the past used to force people to switch to the corrupted version of the scripture, clearly indicating that the scriptures contained writings which were false. Thus, the scriptures that the masses were using were textually corrupted. Since the kings forced the people to switch to their scripture or had them killed, this meant that the true uncorrupt scripture became lost or possibly remained safe with very few number of people. But it seems clear that the corrupted copies were distributed more widely. So we have at least time frame when it was changed. And it should be between Jesus and Muhammad, peace be upon him. But let's read another one. Uthman ibn Affan also compared Muhammad, saying, because the Jews distorted the Torah, they added to it what they liked, and they erased from it what they hated, and they erased the name of Muhammad, peace be upon him, from the Torah, and for that Allah became angry. So this could happen only after the Muhammad, peace be upon him. Then what was changed? Let's go back to the first claim of Ibn Abbas. He said, the kings after the time of Jesus substituted the Torah. Twice he said it. But we don't know what exactly they substituted. So I just guessing maybe it was, 15 commandments. Okay? And then, I don't know, they don't like 5 and they brought down to 10. You never know. Well, Sir Rasulullah, let's go on and read another, like from biography from Muhammad, peace be upon him. So it said, on another occasion, the Apostle of Allah wrote to the Jews of Khaybar in this manner, in the name of Allah, the merciful, the compassionate. This is from Muhammad, Apostle of Allah, friend and brother of Moses, who confirms the revelation which Moses brought. Verily, Allah said to you, men of the scripture, and you will find it in your scripture, in the days of Muhammad, peace be upon him, in the Khaybar. Let's read what we should find in the Torah. Quote start. Muhammad is apostle of Allah. Those with him are violent against unbelievers, but merciful to one another. You can see them kneeling or prostrated, suing for the bounty and approbation of Allah. Their foreheads are marked by the traces of that prostration. Allah promises to those who believe and do good work forgiveness and a great reward. Well, at least now we know exactly what we're missing in today's Torah. But let's move forward a little bit. Before that, I have to remind our Christian Muslim friends about the story of creation, and it's found in Genesis. The name in Genesis, Bereshit, in the beginning. So we have the first two verses, Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2. It said, in the beginning God created the heaven and earth, etc. And then we have, let's go to the statement of early Muslims. Now, again, from the same website, it said, evidence from the statement of Ka'b al-Akbar, who died 636 AD. Ka'b al-Akbar was a prominent rabbi who converted to Islam some years after the Prophet died. He is reported to have said in an authentic narration, what he said, the first line of the Torah says, Genesis 1:1, first line of the Torah, Muhammad is a messenger of Allah and my chosen slave. Verily, he is neither rude nor harsh, and he is a man who would not yell or scream in markets, and he will never award an ill deed with an ill deed. On the contrary, he will always award ill deed with a forgiveness. His birth will take place in Mecca, and his immigration will be Taibar, and his dominion will be in Sham. Well, it's not the end of it. We have a second line of the Torah, according to this guy, and it said, you might guess it now, I guess, right? Muhammad is a messenger of Allah, his nation are constantly praising, they praise Allah, etc. Well, let's see what someone wants to say about it. Here we see that Ka'b al-Akbar is giving descriptions of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, from the Torah that we cannot find in today's Bible. And he's completely right. We cannot find this in today's Bible. Well, the possible logical explanation, conclusion from that statement is the description was removed and something else was added to fill the void. So, What has been changed in the Torah, at least we know it, is description of Muhammad, peace be upon him. So we have technical aspect to look at it. Supposedly you're right. And description of Muhammad, peace be upon him, was removed. And it must be done only after the Muhammad, peace be upon him. So and then Torah was unchanged, at least in a connection with the Muhammad, peace be upon him, until 622 AD. It means that Jews changed it after meeting Muhammad, and the Jews of Al-Yatrib completely rewrite the Torah, and it takes you 1.5 years to rewrite the scroll from the beginning. After being expelled, they brought this corrupted Torah to other Jewish community, and they eventually convinced all other Jews of known world to rewrite every existing Torah. Now I have to show the map of the Roman Empire at that time. The Jews were already dispersed for centuries. And do you think how many Jewish synagogues were on this place? Thousands? Now guess what? You have to ride donkey, or by foot, or by horse, or whatever, and you have to bring it to every single Jewish community. And not only that, it's hard to do it, but you have to convince everybody. And everybody will say, yes, I agree with you. Well, do you say that two Jews agree with about anything? Well, that's not the end of it. In order to complete the job, Jews should convince all Christians to apply the same change in their Bible in the Torah section. Well, I have to remind you, how many Christians' Bible do we have? Latin, Vulgate, Syriac, Peshitta, Coptic Bibles, Armenian Bible, Byzantine text, 1,000 manuscripts altogether. We can see them in the museums, etc. So again, situation is, let's look at the map and think about it. How, like, we have thousands upon thousands of Christian communities, churches, monasteries, whatever, and they have the Bible in it. So now Jews, after the finishing the job of all Jewish communities, they have to knock the doors of every church or big communities. Hi, hello my friend Bishop, could you please change the Torah? And everybody said, oh, sure, no problem, let's do it. And they have to compile together and read together and change together. So we have two problems with technical aspect. So Jews should change all the Torahs in their possession. Then they have to convince all the Christians to change the Torahs. But most important, they have to have, can you imagine that this conspiracy must be going on? And they have to really leave some kind of note. At least Muslim sources should say, you know what? We heard somebody is saying to another guy, let's remove name of Muhammad from the Torah. And somebody said, oh, I became out. Okay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kerimli. Folks, at this time, we're going to take a 10-minute break. This church, of course, we consider this a great sin. So if you could have your cell phones turned off. Some people have lost their lives as a result of that. No, I'm just kidding. I'd like to take this opportunity to also introduce each of the speakers. Since Mr. Sadat Anwar is going to be speaking first, I'd like to begin first by giving you his biography. Sadat was born and raised in Canada. Sadat is a Sunni Muslim. He's also a graduate of the University of Toronto with a master's degree in Middle Eastern Studies. Sadat has a keen interest in interfaith dialogue, especially between the three Abrahamic faiths. He's also a member of the Muslim Debate Initiative, MDI, an Islamic organization based in the United Kingdom. He's also active in Dawah, which is Muslim outreach, involved in activities in the Greater Toronto area. Mr. Alex Kerimli. Alex was born in Azerbaijan. Alex was born and raised, actually, he was an atheist and then became a Christian. He's an evangelical Christian, active in evangelism, and he is part of the Road to Christ Christian ministry. So, without any further ado, I'm going to ask Mr. Sadat Anwar to come and to give his first opening statements of 35 minutes, and then we will have Mr. Alex Kerimli. Can you please help me in welcoming Sadat Anwar?
In the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful. First of all, I'd like to thank everyone here at Faith Baptist Church, especially Pastor Brian Robinson and Pastor Mr. Gary Thompson for hosting the debate, Mr. Tony Costa for moderating the debate, and of course Alex Kerimli for the invitation to do the debate. Can we trust today's Torah? Today's Torah. It depends partly on what we mean by trust.
Heritage College and Seminary in Cambridge, Ontario, and Providence Theological Seminary in Colorado Springs, Colorado. He has lectured and ministered throughout Canada, the United States, and overseas. Tony is happily married to his wonderful wife and 3 children and resides in Toronto, Canada. Please help me in welcoming Dr. Tony Costa.
Very much, Gary, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming here tonight for this very important event on can we trust the Torah, or can we trust today's Torah. So thank you again for giving up your Friday evening to be here with us tonight and share in this very important event. Let me just say something about the topic of the debate and the rules of the debate that have been mutually agreed upon by both parties. In terms of the outline of tonight's debate, each speaker is going to have introductory statements about, they're going to be 35 minutes in length each, and we'll begin first with Mr. Sadat Anwar, followed by Mr. Alex Kerimli, and then this will be followed by first rebuttals of 12 minutes each, and then second rebuttals of 5 minutes each, and then finally each speaker will have their concluding remarks of 12 minutes each. In terms of the format as well, after the introductory statements from each of the speakers, there's going to be a 10-minute break. And we also encourage you to check some of the tables that we have. We have a table at the back. I believe there's 2 tables that you can check out some information that is relevant to the topic tonight, or just information on both Christianity and Islam. So that's right at the back at the entrance to the church building. In terms of the debate format itself, we ask the audience please refrain from any forms of interruptions while the speakers are giving their lecture. Please withhold your applauses to the end. Hold your takbirs and your hallelujahs to the very end if you can. And if you don't, we will ask you to kindly leave the building. Moreover, we also ask that if you have any cell phones with you, please turn them off. There's nothing more wrong than cell phones going off. And so
begin. Biography of Dr. Tony Costa. So Tony Costa has an earned BA and MA in the study of religion and biblical studies and philosophy from the University of Toronto. Tony received his PhD in the area of theology and New Testament studies from Radboud University in the Netherlands. He is a member of the Society of Biblical Literature, the Evangelical Theological Society, and the Evangelical Philosophical Society. His area of expertise is biblical and systematic theology, cults, and New Age movement, and comparative world religions with a specialization in Islam. Tony is also an ordained minister of the gospel. As a Christian apologist, Dr. Costa gives reasons for the valid beliefs in Christianity and advocates the unique claims of Jesus Christ. He is also a lecturer at various universities and colleges on the existence of God as well as the credibility of the Christian faith. Tony is also a professor of apologetics with Toronto Baptist Seminary. He also serves as an adjunct professor.
There's people that I trust partly, but not fully. There are people whose judgment I trust, but I don't trust their memory. Or I trust their memory, and I don't trust their judgment. Similarly, there are books that I trust for historical information, but not necessarily for morals or for theology. And conversely, there are parables and fairy tales and stories that we can trust for good moral lessons, but not necessarily for history. The question for the purpose of our discussion here is whether we can trust today's Torah 100% as the inerrant word of God without any errors and without any contradictions. Can we trust the Torah in that way? Can we trust the Torah in the way that Alex and evangelical Christians trust it? My answer to that question is no. Muslims do trust and believe in the original Holy Torah, which was revealed to the prophet Moses by God on Mount Sinai. But we cannot fully trust the present-day Torah, or the so-called 5 books of Moses found in the modern Bible. Today's Torah is not the same Torah as the one that was revealed to the prophet Moses 3,500 years ago. Today's Torah still does contain the words of God and his prophets, but it also includes the words of third-party scribes, priests, and redactors who have sometimes falsely attributed statements to God and his prophets. Now, before I get into the reasons why, there's 2 misconceptions that I quickly want to clarify. Both of these misconceptions can be found in what Alex has presented in the past, and he's called the Muslim Global Torah Change Conspiracy. Misconception number 1 is that Alex has said in the past that all Muslims believe that the Torah was changed after the time of the Prophet Muhammad. Fact. There is no one official sanctioned Islamic view on when, where, or how, or by whom the Torah was changed. The idea that the Torah was changed after the time of Muhammad is one strand of thought amongst many strands of thought. In other words, Alex has in the past committed a strawman fallacy. There are even some Quranic verses and hadiths that would imply or indicate that the Torah may have been changed before the time of the Prophet Muhammad. That may come up in the rebuttals. Misconception number 2 is that by believing that the Torah has been changed, Muslims are engaging in a conspiracy theory. We are believing this conspiracy theory against all of the historical evidence, against the manuscript evidence, against the archaeological evidence. In short, Muslims are out in the cold in complete opposition to the historical proof by believing that the Torah has been changed. Fact. The majority of Western academic scholars of the Torah today, including even the majority of Jewish and Christian scholars, believe that the Torah as we have it today was originally composed more than half a millennium after the time of the prophet Moses. What Islam teaches about the corruption of the Jewish and the Christian scriptures may have sounded like a conspiracy theory back in the 7th century, but in the 21st century, there's a remarkable convergence between what the Quran and the Islamic tradition are saying about the previous scriptures and what modern scholarship of the Torah is saying. The idea that most of the Torah was composed after the time of Moses can be found in the Quran in chapter 2, verse 79. فَوَيْلُ الَّذِينَ يَكْتُبُونَ الْكِتَابَ بِأَيْدِيهِمْ ثُمَّ يَقُولُونَ هَذَا مِنْ عِنْدِ اللَّهِ لِيَشْتَرُوا ثَمَنًا قَلِيلًا. The translation is that they write with their own hands. The preceding verses are talking about the Jews. Then it says they write with their own hands. Woe to those who write with their own hands and then say that this is from God, in order to gain from it some miserable gain. How are modern-day scholars of the Torah, including even most Christian scholars, agreeing with this Quranic verse or with this Quranic allegation? Well, today one of the main theories on the authorship of the Torah adopted by Christians is called the documentary hypothesis. In a nutshell, modern-day scholars say that the Torah had 4 different strands of writing, 4 different writers or groups of writers wrote the modern-day Torah. They identified these strands as the J source, which was written around 950 BCE, the E source, or the Elohist source, which was written 100 years after that, the D source, or the Deuteronomist source, which was written around 600 BCE, and finally the P, or the priestly source, which was written around 500 BCE. Take note of the dates, because if Moses lived between 1300 and 1500 BCE, and if the P source was composed, let's say, in 500 BCE, we're already close to 1,000 years after the time of Moses. The